Talk Politics is Steve Brawner. He is an independent columnist with Stevens Media, and he is also a blogger with TalkBusiness.net. Steve, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Was this a good deal, or should I say, was this a good deal for someone and not a good deal for someone else? Who was this a good deal for?
I'm trying to think. It was a terrible deal. You know, this goes back to 2011 when they had the whole debt ceiling debacle, and nothing happened. And there was talk of a $4 trillion combination of tax cuts, tax increases, and spending cuts. That didn't happen. At one point, the presidential candidates on the Republican side were asked if you could have $10 in spending cuts for $1 in tax cuts, would you take it? They all said no. Well, now we got $600 billion in tax increases, and at the moment, no spending cuts. So it's a bad deal all around.
Yeah. Why does it have to come to the last minute? And even when they went beyond the last minute this time, I mean, this was really the worst I think I have ever seen it. Would you agree with that?
It's an embarrassment to the world. I mean, I think the world is watching, and we don't look good at the moment. I don't know why it comes down to the last minute, except to say that this is what the American people allow. Until the American people say this is not acceptable, then it will keep happening.
Yeah, I'm going to pull from one of your recent columns here where you've written about this, and you said that in the end the blame doesn't necessarily go towards Congress. As you just indicated, the blame goes towards the voters. You wrote, this past election, voters across the country granted their stamp of approval on $16 trillion in debt by re-electing mostly the same people who had a big hand in creating it. It's our fault. That's what you're saying.
That's what we've been doing for the past 30 years. You know, the last time the government had a balanced budget or no debt at all was 1835. And since then it's been slowly growing. It was $1 trillion when Reagan was elected, and now it's $16.3 trillion. And we've reached a point where we're just basically in a state of status quo year after year. We had a Democrat in the Oval Office, we had a Democratic Senate, we had a Republican House, and that's what we still got. So, you know, at some point the voters have to look at themselves and say, how much of this is our responsibility to keep electing these people?
What if you're not getting candidates that are willing to do anything about it, though? Everybody gives a good stump speech. Everybody talks about it. But when push comes to shove, they don't get anything done. Congressmen
do not get phone calls from constituents saying, we are in such debt that I'm willing to pay more in taxes if everyone else is. And I'm also willing to have less benefits. And they do not get campaign donations from the groups that say the same thing. They get phone calls from people who say, cut my taxes, but keep my benefits. And they get donations from groups that say, we want these special breaks. And so at this point, it's in Congress's special self-interest to continue this status quo, and it will be that way until voters say differently.
But going back to the fiscal cliff vote that we just saw pass right here, they basically push this thing further down the road for another 60 days. As you wrote in one of your columns, they hit the snooze button on the alarm. They're going to be dealing with this in 60 days. Why should we think that they're going to do anything different?
I don't think they will do anything different. The one thing that's different is that the argument was a combination of tax increases versus spending cuts. Well, now tax increases are off the table. They're not going to talk about tax increases anymore, and so that at least one side is done. The Republicans actually feel pretty good about this. They feel like that Obama's wish, President Obama's wish, is he's gotten what he wanted, a tax increase on the wealthiest Americans. So now it's all about spending cuts next time. We'll see if anything changes.
How deep do you think they can go on spending cuts? The debate is that if you go too far with spending cuts, you cause another recession. If you don't go far enough, you don't do anything about it. Do you think that there is some magical tipping point in there? Is there any kind of consensus out there that says, yeah, there's an increment we could hit, or there's a range we could hit, and it would not do the worst damage, but it would also help us move towards it being in the black?
Consensus? No. There's no consensus in Washington right now. So no, not yet. They'll do the best they can.
Even outside of Washington, though, not necessarily just among congressional officials, but I mean, is there a consensus in the business community, among economists? Is there a consensus anywhere that there is a path to the future? We had the bipartisan commission that laid some plans out there. Those plans haven't been followed.
there's not a consensus now in the country. I don't think that the American people have yet come to grips with the fact that the United States has a military that is as big as the next 13 militaries combined, and therefore that's one place where we could make some cuts. They haven't come to grips with the fact that by 2025, all of our current revenues will be spent on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest, with nothing left over for anything else. And until Americans have come to some kind of agreement, some kind of grips with that situation, we're not ready to make the choices we had to make.
I think in the end, you are an optimist. I think that you have laid out in some of your recent writings how Republicans and Democrats, they have come together and worked on some things before. It just happens to always be minor things like renaming post offices, or maybe fighting for some self-preservation and some, for economic development in some certain communities. But on these big issues, do you hold out any hope that there could be some bipartisan consensus reached at some point in time?
Democracies need a crisis sometimes to act. I fear we're going to have one in order to do what we need to do. But possibly, the system needs a shock. It needs some kind of something to shake it out of itself. And so we need somebody to come along, an independent-minded billionaire who just decides, I'm going to tell people what I think it needs to be done. Maybe 3 or 4 senators who are independents, who form the balance of power that both parties must have them in order to have a majority. But something has to happen politically for that to happen. Well,
we will see if that does occur. Thank you so much for being here. He's Steve Brawner. He's an independent columnist with Stevens Media. You can also check out his work on talkbusiness.net.